people who are used to making music electronically, but who didn't have a way to work away from the computer. So traditionally, the way new music gets made these days is you sit with a mouse and stare into a screen. It's not necessarily super intuitive or fun, but playing instruments is fun, and we wanted to get back to a world where you could really get your hands on something without thinking about the computer at all, and just play and have music come out. So what I'm going to do is start from scratch here. I have nothing prepared, and I'm going to build a little tune, and we'll see how far we get. So one of the things that you can do with Ableton Push is play and step sequence beats at the same time. So what I'm going to do is load a drum kit here. When I push this browse button, we have access to a bunch of sounds. And now you'll notice after I load an instrument, the pad grid reconfigures itself. And the way this is set up is that we have 16 pads here for real-time playing. Right? This is sort of the classic workflow that guys like AKAI made famous with the MPC. But we have all these other pads too, so we can configure these to do different things. These 16 pads let you set the length of the loop that you're working on, which will make sense in a minute. And then these 4 rows of pads are for step sequencing. So the last pad that you play in this 16 pad section determines what it is that you're going to step sequence. So what I'm going to do is set up an empty 2-bar loop. And I do this just by tapping these 2 buttons. And now we get this running green cursor. And what this is showing me is where I am in the step sequence. So currently it's scrolling at 16 notes. We have 2 bars of 16 notes. This column of buttons lets me change the resolution of the scroll. So now it's scrolling in quarter notes. So I only have 8 quarter notes, but it's still representing 2 bars. And here's 30-second note triplets, so we can change the resolution. And so each of these pads now represents a 16 note. So what I'm going to do is start entering in some notes. So I step sequence in the kick drum pattern. I'm going to turn the tempo up here to about 135. We have a dedicated knob for tempo. And now I'll punch in some hi-hats too. So just on the offbeats there. So this is only 2 bars long. Maybe I want this to be a 4-bar pattern. I can extend this out now to be 4 bars long. But the last 2 bars will be silent. So now I'm just going to plug in some information in these 2 bars. I only want to see these 2 bars for now. Make these offbeat hi-hats again in this set of 2 bars. And put some kick drum stuff here. And let's make this 4 bars again. So what I like about this loop length controls is that it allows me to create different ideas within a single longer pattern and then just zoom in on one chunk. If I just want to hear this first bar, I can double tap that pad and now we have only 1 bar playing of what is a 4-bar loop, or only the 4th bar. So let's extend this out again to be 4 bars. So now a quick way of creating a hi-hat and kick drum pattern. Now let me also do some real-time recording as well. So in addition to step sequencing, we can record in real time. I'm going to turn on record quantization because I don't want to take any chances of playing crappy. And now I'm going to punch in, and you'll notice that when I push this record button, the pads that were green, that were indicating playback position, are now red, and that means that we're recording. So I'm going to record some additional stuff on top of this freely. So that was super sloppy, but it doesn't matter because everything is quantized as it comes in to the nearest 16th note. So this instrument is a little loud. If I hold down this pad, I can just dial down its volume a little bit. Every pad that I touch reconfigures these 8 encoders up here so that I can change parameters that are specific to that sound. So that's nice. I like what I have here. I want to create some variations of it, but I don't want to lose this material. So I'm going to press this duplicate button, which creates a copy. There we go. Sometimes these buttons are a little sticky. So now I have 2 identical versions of the same material. And when I push these up and down arrow buttons, what happens is I move between the variations that I have, but the playback position is relative, so it doesn't jump. It picks up where I left off in the previous clip. So here's the first one, here's the second one. Now in addition to step sequencing and real-time playing, we also have note repeat. So I'm going to enable the rate set by these buttons. And you'll notice as I lean into the pad, it gets louder. So in addition to velocity sensitivity, we have pressure sensitivity, which affects the incoming velocity. And I don't want this to be straight. I'm going to dial in just a little bit of swing for this. We have a knob for real-time swing. If I dial it up really high, it sounds like I'm really cheesy. If I dial it back to just a little bit, it creates a nice feel. Now I'll overdub this. So I can create these really subtle variations just by changing my finger pressure on this pad in the real-time repeat mode. Now let me turn down the volume of this instrument just a little bit. The whole thing is a little bit too loud. So remember, I have this one version which has no shaker, and I can move seamlessly to the second version that has the shaker. And finally I'll overdub a little bit of this vocal sample. That's a little too loud too. And I'd like to put an effect on just this sound. So I'm going to push this Add Effect button, which takes me to a browser of effects. And now I'm going to create a little filter delay that I'm going to drop just on that sound. So I can individually change the processing chain for each of the instruments in the rack, as well as putting effects on the entire instrument itself. So real-time recording, step sequencing, note repeat, individual effects processing, all of this is possible in our drums mode. Now let's go beyond drums. I'm going to add a track. And this brings me back to our browser, and now I'm going to load a pitched instrument. Let's load an organ. Now you see the pad grid reconfigures itself again. Here's a good time for me to stop the transport so we can talk a little bit about what happens here. When I switch from drums to pitches, the note grid reconfigures itself again. So now this note grid represents the notes currently in C major. So we have a system that we've configured here for representing pitch on an 8x8 grid. It's a really interesting way of thinking about note entry. The way this works, by default, we have only notes that are in a particular key. And I can change the key using these green buttons here and change the scale type using these buttons here. By default, we're in C major. The blue pads represent Cs. These are the tonic of the key that we're in. The other pads represent the other notes in the key of C major. So we move diatonically to the right and we move up in diatonic fourths. So another way of playing a scale is to play 3 notes to the right and then up to the next row. So what's interesting, because we have this transpositional symmetry, I only need to learn the fingering pattern for a scale. I know the C major pattern. If you were to play a C minor scale on a piano, you'd have to have different fingerings, right? There are 3 flats in the key of C minor. So your fingering changes. On push, it's the same fingering. If I switch to C minor, or B minor. So once you learn a pattern, that pattern is infinitely transposable across all of the scale types and all of the key centers that we have here. So that's interesting, but some of you are probably making music that's not entirely diatonic. You want to play chromatic notes as well. You can turn this in-key behavior off, and now the pitch grid changes again. So here still, the blue pads represent the Cs. The other white pads represent the other diatonic notes, and the unlit pads are the notes that aren't in the key. So you can think of this as white keys and black keys if you're in C major. So now, we move chromatically to the right and up in perfect fourths instead of diatonic fourths. What's really interesting about this is now you have access to the entire chromatic range as well as the in-key range. So if you want to get chromatic behavior, you can switch to this chromatic mode, or if you want to make sure that everything you play stays in the key, you can switch to this in-key mode. And what I like about this, the way we've set up this pitch structure, is that by building vertically in fourths, it makes it really easy to play kind of modal harmonies or pseudo-jazz. And I'm a terrible pianist, but I can get away with sort of faking this quasi-Bill Evans world on push much easier than I could on a piano, and again, in any key, because transposition is now kind of a non-issue. So let's record some material. I'm going to dial out some interesting changes in the parameters for this sound. I'm going to add an effect to it. Let me add an auto filter so I can make it a little darker. It's a little bright right now. And turn down the resonance a little bit. And let's switch back to C minor. So this shape is the shape for a ninth chord. We have a major, minor triad, minor seventh, and the minor ninth on top. I'm going to record on top of this. I'll start playback again, which plays the drum loop we had. I'm going to set the recording to be 4 bars long. So it's fixed now to a 4-bar length. So I can punch in and punch out anytime, and I know that at the end of 4 bars it'll loop again.